okay, we will shake hands and agree on that. And then he removed that day the male goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all brown among the sheep he gave to his sons. Laban did. So they're separating the animals. Laban's taking what he said that he'll agree to, and Jacob took the less desirable, probably. Then something happened here I've read 3 or 4 times. Maybe you can understand it better than I can. Let's take a look at verse 37. Jacob took rods of green poplar and of the hazel and the chestnut tree, and pulled the white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rod. So he's stripping off the outside, and he set the rods before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering trough, when the flocks came to drink. What in the world's going on here? And then he said, in order that they should conceive when they came to drink. Evidently, there's something in the chemicals of the trees that are mentioned here. When he peeled the rods back, it actually, the flocks came to drink of the water and were capable, it had some effect on the animals as they drank. Probably one writer says it served as an aphrodisiac, possibly, as a fertility enhancer to really seal the job that the animals will get pregnant. That's what he's talking about. Anyway, his animals, both of them prospered. Even Laban prospered from it, but Jacob prospered a lot more than Jacob prospered more than his father-in-law Laban did. So notice he used the rods in the troughs where the strong animals drank, but not when the weaker animals came. Therefore, the stronger animals were stimulated to mate. As we'll see here in just a moment, the word in verse 28 for conceive, in Hebrew, the word is hot, or today we use the expression in heat. That's what this word conceive is derived from. So there was something in the water that hastened the fact that they would conceive. Verse 39, the flocks did conceive. And they brought forth cattle that were ring, straight, speckled, and spotted, which meant Jacob was doing well. These were his. And then he separated them and set the faces of the flock toward the ring-straked and all the brown, and put his own flocks, separated them by themselves from Laban's. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger cattle were in heat, that Jacob laid the rods before the cattle, before the animals, the stock, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he didn't do that. And so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger were Jacob's. And then you have a summation of the whole thing. Verse 43, the man increased exceedingly and had a lot of stock, and also maidservants. He had to hire help. He had men servants. He also purchased camels and asses or donkeys. He was really amassing a lot of wealth. So Jacob was doing very well. But the problem was that Laban's boys realized that fact. Now, what are they thinking? Probably something like this. Take a look at our flock. We're getting a good crop, all right, of stock, but boy, it doesn't compare with what Jacob's getting. And it wasn't only because Jacob was aware of some of the agricultural aspects of this, nor, I think without a doubt, God's providence played a great part, because God's the one that speaks to Jacob and is telling him what to do, and he's telling them what God, has done for him. So look at verse 1. Genesis 31, verse 1. Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons. They were talking with each other, probably a little louder than they thought, or maybe they thought Jacob wasn't around to hear. But he overheard what was being said by his cousins, Laban's boys. And here's what they were saying. Jacob has taken away all that was our father's. Well, now, wait a minute. That was a part of the agreement from the very beginning between their daddy and Jacob. That I'll take these and you take all of the solid color animals. Just happened that the kind that were preferred weren't doing as well as Jacob's. But anyway, they're jealous, and they say, all that was our father's, he has gotten all of this glory. Now we have, look at the jealousy here. We're talking about the number of animals, the flock. Jacob's, by comparison, was greater. And then they were also upset. This is in Jeremiah 31, verse 1. Latter part of that, they were also upset with Jacob because he was getting all the praise. I thought that was fascinating. They're always talking about Jacob. They're not talking about us. They say, look how well Jacob is doing. Well, Jacob took a look at Laban, and he beheld his countenance. In other words, he was looking down in the dumps. He was upset. And Jacob said when he saw the countenance of Laban, it was a different look than what he was used to before. So it was because he was doing so well, the boys were getting jealous. They're letting Dad know how they felt. And of course the Lord knows what's going on. So the Lord said to Jacob in verse 3, Jacob, now's the time for you to make your exit and go back to your dad, Isaac, all the way back to Canaan. So we're talking now about 300 to 500 miles here. Go back to your original home, under the land of Canaan, the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will bless you in this trip. So Jacob sent. Now this tells you a little bit about where they were positioned. Notice verse 4. Jacob and Rachel were separated from each other. I don't know how far, maybe just a very few miles. But anyway, he was tending the flock. And so he he sent somebody, some of his servants, to go back to the tent where they made their abode. They didn't have a house, but they went back to Rachel and Leah and bring them to me here in the field, in the pasture, where these animals are feeding. So he said, I want to talk to Rachel and to Leah. Go get them and bring them to me. Genesis 31, verse 5. Here's what he said when they got there. I see that your father's countenance, that is, well, it's changed. It's not like it was before toward me, but the God of my father has blessed me. And you know, you, Rachel, you, Leah, you two know that with all of my power I have served your father, Laban. You've experienced it. 20 years. You've noticed what's going on, what kind of progress was being made. Your father deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not permit him to hurt me. If Laban said this, verse 8, if Laban, your dad, said to me, the spectacle of the flock will be your wages, then all the rest of the flock, then they bear the spectacle. But if he said the ring straight are going to be what you get, then he's the one that set the conditions. So he said, in this manner, the word thus simply means like so, in this manner. In this manner, God has taken away the cattle from your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, he lifted up his eyes. Now it's nighttime. He has had a dream. God speaks to him in this dream. And he says in verse 10, when the rams leaped upon the females of the flock, I would think if I were you, I would simply mark through the word cattle and put flock there. But when the rams leaped upon the flock, they were ringed, straight, speckled, and grizzled. And the angels of God said to me in a vision, Jacob, and I said, I'm here. He said to me, lift up your eyes and see all of the rams which leap upon the flock, they're all ringed, straight, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen that all of Laban is done to you. Here's the point. What he was dreaming was not what was really happening. God was simply telling him by this dream, what did you see? You saw all of the inferior animals, the less desirable ones. Why? Well, he goes on to say, the ring straight, speckled, and grizzled, this happened. And he's telling us, and he's also telling Jacob exactly why. It wasn't so much the water that animals were drinking. It wasn't so much that. Even possibly it had something to do with the wood from the various trees, but I think even probably there, it's primarily God moving in the background by providence. I say that because the last part of verse 12, look at that. The angel said, I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am aware of what Laban has been doing. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, you'd been here earlier, and you vowed a vow to me. Now arise and get out of the land and return to the land of your relatives. Okay, we'll stop right there, pick it up in just a moment. But this is when God told him, hey, I'm the one that's been controlling this entire affair. And he finally understood it was God's intervention here. Even this passage, as well as Genesis 32, verse 10, tells about the same thing. So Jacob has become very quickly a wealthy farmer, doing quite well. And some of it possibly had to do with his knowledge of animal breeding. I mean, he'd been working 20 years now. You got to learn something in 20 years. But in addition to that, by means of animal breeding and so on, he had the benefit of God blessing him in his undertakings. So, by normal standards, Laban should have done well also. But Jacob was doing so well that the boys became jealous, and they wanted Dad to step in and do something. Don't let Jacob do this to you, Dad. I don't think they would probably say why, but let me add my thought here. I think what they were thinking is, don't let Jacob do this to you, Dad, because we want to inherit one of these days all of this, and we want all of it. I think that's really what's going on. So God intervened in a marvelous, mysterious, miraculous way. And here we are in time, about 1740 BC. Jacob makes this particular comment that we've read in your hearing now. Notice we make some comments regarding what we've read. Laban's boys get very jealous. Jacob had been a good worker for Laban. Things were going well with Laban too. He was doing just fine financially. And the way that things were working out now made him look on things a little bit differently. His boys did too, of course. Now, I think probably at this point, Laban would have been glad for Jacob to go ahead and leave. But how could you do away with the agreement that you'd made with Jacob about all the animals? They're going to go with him too. So how could he prevent his flocks from going with Jacob? Well, God spoke to Jacob and said, Jacob, it's time for you to make a move. It's time for you to get out of here, go back home over to Canaan, and we know, I will add these words, go back home and establish the promised nation in the promised land, Canaan. That's where Jacob is at this particular point. So anyway, he gets with his two daughters and says, here's what's been going on. Here's what I've got planned. But I want you to know about it, what's going to happen. How are they going to receive what he has to say? Because he's going to be talking about their daddy, Laban. And you know, they have been watching for 20 years what a good worker Jacob was for their dad. And now they've also picked up on the fact that Laban wasn't really treating Jacob like a good son-in-law. So they are aware of that fact. Now Jacob tells them, just think a moment, think back how things have been going. So he was going to inform his wife of his plans. They went to the fields and talked to him, and he said, your dad no longer feels toward me like he did in the beginning. That's obvious by looking at his outward countenance. He had reworked our agreement and deceived me regarding the wages that I would receive. So evidently, I take from this fact, this idea, that evidently Laban had changed Jacob's wages for really no other reason except to hinder Jacob's increase in wealth. He is really getting a lot here. Maybe he had second thoughts about making the original agreement with him. He's doing well. Okay, now here's the time. They're going to meet. They're going to have a discussion. How's it going to work out? Laban probably would just as soon Jacob would take off and leave everything with Laban and the boys who are going to inherit all of it. But anyway, Jacob told them, his wives, about it. They're not going to really be surprised because they've been witnessing a lot of what's been going on for all this time. So Jacob just pours his heart out to the two women, Leah and Rachel, and said, it's time for us to go. He doesn't know how that's going to be accepted by them at this point, but he's doing his best to tell them why they're going to have to leave. But they've been watching the action of their father for all these years, so they could understand why God had blessed Jacob so much as he did. But anyway, it's interesting to take a look at Rachel and Leah right here. They're beginning to tell how they felt about it. It looks like they had been resenting the fact. Well, let's see. Verse 14 and 15. Rachel and Leah said, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us if we stay here in our father's house? One of these said it to the other. I don't know which way it was. They were probably both thinking it. What are we going to gain by staying here? Are we not counted of him strangers? Him is daddy. And notice, dad has sold us. That's an interesting word to use. He has sold us just like part of the flock. And and what he got out of it, the money, the wealth that he got out of it, he kept for himself. Now you see some resentment beginning to take place. Here's how they were really feeling it comes out. There was a exorbitant price, I think you would agree, exorbitant price that he had to pay as a, quote, dowry, I guess you could say. I will work for you for Rachel for 7 years. But you know what's happened. He's already given him Leah to be his wife first, and then Rachel about a week or so later. But Dad's not all up front with what he's been doing. And actually, Laban made his daughters love Jacob and resent him. And they were beginning to expound on that resentment. Instead of treating, well, they didn't pay money. These were days of dowry, all right, but here, I mean, Jacob worked 14 years for both women, composite. 14 years. Jacob got some kind of a deal here, didn't he? Can you imagine what that amount of labor would work out to be, monetarily speaking? 14 years. So they resented their father getting so much money, dowry, wealth, value from Jacob, their husband. And he used that like a financial base, not for his daughter's well-being, but probably building up his own holdings, and had given nothing to them. That's why they asked, or made, in their discussion to each other, that's why they said, what is there as an inheritance for us if we stay here with Dad? Verse 14, he's been treating us like a stranger. He sold us. He's devoured the money that would be ours as a child. That's been taken. So that verse 16 says, for all the riches that God had taken from our father, that is ours, and it's our children's. It belongs to them too. We got to think ahead. Now then, whatsoever, husband dear, Jacob, whatever God has said to you, do it. No, that's pretty plain. That's how they felt about it. So Jacob got up, verse 17 says, set his wives and sons upon camels. Now we're getting a little bit of insight into his wealth. I don't know. That's quite a caravan that's heading out. Well, hundreds and hundreds of flock of sheep or goats, camels, all their belongings. That would have been interesting to witness as they left. And it says in verse 18, he carried away all this stuff that he had gotten there in Padan Aram in order to go back to Isaac, his father, back in the land of Canaan. So he thinks Isaac is still alive, and probably is. But that's why he was going back. And Laban set about his regular job. He went to shear his sheep. And Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. That's called the teraphim. What we're talking about here are little idol figurines, idol gods. In other words, idolatry. The granddad, Abraham's dad, Terah, was an idolater. Abraham left a home that was idolatrous. And I mean, he made a severance, but he did a lot better job separating himself than Nahor, his brother, and Abraham did. Abraham separated himself, but Nahor, he went along with Dad regarding idolatry. Okay, now, they're coming in from Mesopotamia, heading west into the land of Canaan, and of course right off to the west of the west edge, the border of Canaan is Mediterranean Sea, still there today. Okay, now, Rachel stole the images. What was she doing? There's a possibility that, and a lot of your writers think it's a real possibility, that she was an idolater also. I think there is another interesting point to be made, and I hope you take this one with you. There was a area called Newsy or Newzoom, but most of the time it's referred to as Newsy. Anybody ever heard of the Newsy tablets? The Newsy tablets. It's quite interesting. I looked on the internet and came up with some information I wanted to share with you. The Newsy tablets, I've heard of them for the last 40 years. But between 1925 and 1933, and notice how recent that is, this was a major find at a place called Newsy. It had more than 5,000 family and administrative archives spanning generations of time between 1450 and 1350 BC. So what have they uncovered? The archaeologists. Well, they went to work again, and in their diggings they came up with something that's very interesting. Yes, it's possible that Rachel was like her dad, influenced somewhat by idolatry. But there is another possibility, I think, probability. Notice this. These tablets that they discovered a little over 100 years ago, that's all, we haven't had them that long, they are telling of practices similar to these things that's going on in Genesis. For example, there's a case in there of adoption for childless couples. Reminds you of Genesis 15, verse 2. Abraham and Sarah were childless. Abraham says, all I've got here as an heir is this one man, my servant. Okay, Genesis 15 and 2. It also talks about inheritance rights. Well, that's what these girls are thinking of right now, Leah and Rachel. Genesis 25:29. And then marriage arrangements, Levirate marriage, and so on. That's all part of their culture. This is not something that just pertained only to God's people here. This was their culture in which they lived. It also, and get this, here's the whole reason I'm bringing this up. Some of these Newsy tablets have references to household gods, just like we read here. The teraphim, Genesis chapter 31, verse 14 and following. Here's another interesting point. Some Newsy tablets are called tablets of sistership, in which a man adopted a woman as his sister. In that society, a wife certainly enjoyed protection, but she would have a greater protection and a superior position if she also had the status of a sister. So a lot of men would take their wives and then have them granted officially sisterhood. Doesn't that remind you of Abraham and Isaac telling Abimelech, she is my sister. All of this kind of stuff we're not aware of until they made this discovery of material in the Newsy tablets. So this might explain why Abraham and Isaac said that their wives were their sisters. It probably was the reason why that Rachel took those, or stole those tablets of these two idols, the teraphim, from Daddy, and put them in her baggage or under her seat where she was seated on this camel. Because why'd she take them? Because she was an idolater? Maybe. But more probably, she took them because they're going to a strange land. And I think that she was trying to make sure that when people in a strange land began to question Jacob's right to have all of this stock, why would she wanted to prove she had the gods, she had the teraphim, she was sitting on it, and under her as they were atop the camels. Okay, these family records were highly valued, passed down from father to son a number of generations before we discovered them. And notice the final thought. Genesis and other books of history in the Old Testament are grounded in actual family, clan, and tribal records that's been passed down from generation to generation. It adds additional concept for us to think about. Motive. Why did she take those teraphim? In order to continue her life as an idolatress? Or did she take him to prove ownership? Interesting. We didn't have that second concept until about 100 years ago. Okay, is that the first or second bell? Already? Okay, we'll pick up Genesis 31, verse 22 then next week. Thanks for your attention.